This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get on. No choice but get on. Mandate, get it on. Welcome to the best hour show in the universe. It's Reasonable Doubt. I'm Adam Carolla. It's Mark Garrigus in New York City. Mark, we miss you getting scolded off the air.
Yeah, I spent the first hour this morning on a court appearance and invoked Rocky and Bullwinkle, and the judge got the joke. But then I got off the court appearance and proceeded to have two of my associates scold me back to back. So apparently that's what I get. I get scolded now on a regular basis. So
I think I was thinking about it as I heard you off the air, and I was trying to think of this phenomenon, which is I think your prime non-scolding years are probably like 33 to 55. So I
think that's really true. Can you explain why? As I'm thinking about it, I agree.
There's the scolding years are sort of the same relationship you have with the diaper. You know, you have it early and you have it late, but you have a nice middle there without it. And so the scolding from 0 to 33, well, you know, obviously the beginning part is teachers and coaches and parents and, you know, you're disruptive, you talk too much, sit down, you know, go stand out in the hall and think about what you said. You know, it's a lot of that. And then you enter your profession. You know, for you, it's a young lawyer. For me, it's a young carpenter. And then you got a bunch of older guys telling you you're doing it wrong. This is how you do it. You don't know what you're doing. Give me that. You know, there's a version of that. And then at some point, you get into your early 30s, and now you're kind of the man. There's a youthfulness. There's also physicality, like, hey, I could kick your ass. I'm 35 years old. You know what I mean? I'm not going to take that much shit from you. And then you're learning, you're growing every day, and then you're becoming this sort of young, up and coming something. Could be a lawyer, could be a carpenter. It doesn't matter. You're coming into your own, and then you ride that for a while because you're building, you're growing, there's success, and then at some point you get into your mid 50s, and now you have a bunch of those 33-year-olds who are working for you, and they're in their prime. So now they think it's their job to coach up the old man, and the scolding begins, and then it just gets progressively worse. You start being told how to dress, you know, before you leave the house, what to say. A lot of nobody gets that old reference. Nobody knows who Cat Stevens is, old man.
Right, exactly.
Right. And then
that was I just said in this court appearance. It's funny you say that because I made a Rocky and Bullwinkle reference by calling it the Wayback Machine. The judge got it. The judge is my age. Mm-hmm. The two associates, the 30-something associates, had no idea what we were talking about. None whatsoever.
And now here's the rub. Here's the interesting thing. Sherman and Peabody, by the way, used a Wayback Machine as a contemporary who shall not scold. But it was under the Rocky and Bullwinkle umbrella.
A rubric, exactly.
The rubric. All right.
Yes.
So then here's the rub. Now here's the difference. Here's why the elder abuse kicks in now in this new era we're living in. When we were young, we looked at older people and things they knew, and we were embarrassed that we didn't get the reference. So if they were making some reference to Marlene Dietrich or, you know, some crooner from the 40s or something like that.
Do you remember Charlie McCarthy? I mean,
sure.
I was one of the, as a young kid, that was one of the first references I didn't get. I didn't understand Charlie McCarthy.
Right. Ventriloquist dummy for Edgar Bergen. Candace
Bergen's father.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, who, by the way, made his bones doing ventriloquism on the radio.
Yeah, which is that's exactly right.
He literally did it on the radio because it was the 30s and the 40s, and that was the medium.
Which always, and I always used to invoke that when I had many decades ago a blind client who was charged with forgery. And I said, this is akin to doing ventriloquism on the radio.
So what the shift, the societal shift, the zeitgeist is, when we were young, we looked at it as sort of our duty to try to get all the references of yore. Could have been to World War II, could have been to pop culture. Now the kids constantly play that I wasn't even born. Now, what you're saying is I wasn't even born. What you're basically saying is I need to know nothing before 1985.
Or 1991. I mean, I can't believe the people who, in my world, who were born in the 90s.
Right. But what is that conceit? You mean the world didn't exist until His Highness was born? Because that's really what they're saying. I wasn't even born yet. Oh, well, then you couldn't possibly know about the Bay of Pigs.
Oh, how about this one? This is real life. You know, my associate Dan Lust, who I love to tease. Dan, last week or the week before, I used the term belt and suspenders. I said, that's really kind of belt and suspenders. He had no idea what I was talking about. Just the expression belt and suspenders. Right. Because nobody wears suspenders anymore, so they don't even understand the reference to belt and suspenders.
Right. Now, if someone had made reference to a Stutz Bearcat or a raccoon coat or said 22 Skidoo, when you were back in your 30s, you would have gone into a shame spiral if you did not know what that reference was. Instead, they become indignant that you dared to bring up something that happened before their dad pulled out of their mom.
And what I don't understand is they have at their disposal something that we did not, which is the internet. We didn't have something that you could check this out immediately, educate yourself, and actually know, or at least think you know, what the reference had to do with. That's what's amazing to me. That's a disconnect.
Well, enough about our walk down our societal memory lane. Let's get into some topics du jour.
Yeah, the obvious topic this week is the Texas law, which has been put into effect, which the U.S. Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, and I had mentioned to Gary on Beyond, it shows that my 333 does not always work. I think one of the 333 theories or corollaries is that when it's upsetting precedent, that Chief Justice Roberts will break ranks with his 3. But what the law does is it creates in Texas a civil right of a cause of action, so that somebody can sue and get up to $10,000 for anybody who is seeking or providing an abortion. Now, why they did it this way is presumably that precisely what happened, that it could not be challenged as a governmental restriction on the right to abortion prior to 22 to 24 weeks, which is a case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which is generally considered to be the age of viability for a fetus. And the precedent is based on Roe v. Wade that you can't do any governmental action that would get in the way of that. So now this has been enacted by 5-4. They did not strike it down. And whoever thought up the gambit, so to speak, of making it a private right of action, cause of action, has basically done what they needed to do to put this into effect. So now there's various. First, let me hear what you got to say, because I saw your tweet yesterday, which I retweeted, which I thought was very interesting, You said something to the effect of, this is crazy, or the fact that you think it's crazy means it's really crazy.
Well, all right. So here's my thought. I've always been sort of agnostic on abortion. So I've never been for the rights version of it. And then I think what happened with the left is they kind of got over their skis with it. They're now they're celebrating abortion, and they're talking about Handmaid's Tale, and they've got, and they made a mistake with, my body, my choice and all that, because of course all the vaxxers now are coming out and going, your body, your choice. You're the guys that are agitating to have federal mandates for vaccination. So the left got over their skis with their sort of celebration of it, and the parade of deplorables, as you always say, like this is going, Hobby Lobby doesn't provide birth control. Okay, that's denying women of birth control. That's denying women of reproductive rights or whatever it is. They've gone way too.
They denied access.
They don't have access. Like, Hobby Lobby does not deny you access to birth control. They don't provide you birth control. I don't provide lunch here on a daily basis. I do not deny Gary going to Quiznos. So they've gone nuts on the left, and they've used too much hyperbole. Now, the right, they've gone, in my belief, too far with this. I've always said, and I think I wrote it in my last book, we need to pick a number. Like we pick, you're 18, you can go into the military. Well, Arkansas you can't be 14 and go into the military in Arkansas, and you can't be 31 and go into the military in California. We've sort of picked a number. It's like 18. Okay, driver's license, 16. That's pretty much across the board. Drinking, 21. We do that as a society. I feel the same way with abortion as we should do with the statutory laws, which is it shouldn't be 14 in Hawaii and 17 in California and 18 in Oregon. We need to just kind of go, we're now a global society. Southwest Airlines we have no more borders anymore. Let's just agree on a number and sort of make it universal. On the other hand, I do respect and like states' rights, and I do have this sort of philosophical question, and then we'll circle back once again. I was thinking about this the other day, which is we live in California, and we have a Democratic supermajority in California, and the legislators and the governor and the mayor of Los Angeles and everyone else, they have an agenda. And their agenda is a progressive agenda, because why wouldn't it be a progressive agenda? We don't have school choice in California because we have a progressive agenda that's in with the teachers' unions. And we want to teach this as the curriculum once we get to schools. There is an agenda, taxes, regulation, environmental, whatever. I mean, that's what they do. What's surprising to me is in a red state, they have a red agenda. And that's their agenda. CNN gets their panties in a bunch. Like, oh my God, what's going on? What's going on is a red agenda. They don't want masks. They want lower taxes. They want to outlaw abortion. That's what they do. The same way Gavin Newsom is doing what he's doing in the other direction here. So it's, first off, just philosophically, you got to wrap your head around this stuff, which is, yes, blue states have a very blue agenda, and guess what? Red states are going to have a red agenda. So we shouldn't be like, what's he doing? Well, what's he's doing? He's doing a red agenda because he's red. It's a red state Republican. So that being said, I've often thought that if, in fact, I've never really worried about the whole country turning into this sort of, abolish Roe v. Wade and anti-abortion, whatever, because California is never going to go down that road, for instance, and Oregon and Washington. And, there's many, many states that will not, New York, they will not go down that road. And so what this is going to cause probably is if you live in California and you're tired of all the taxes and regulations, then you're moving to Arizona, or you're moving to Florida, or you're moving to Texas. If you live in Texas and you want mask mandates and you want abortion to be ubiquitous, then you're going to have to move to California. So, I mean, we're basically saying, look, I'm not getting an abortion, but I pay a shitload in taxes, so I'll move to Texas and I'll live in the apartment of one of the gals who's upset about the abortion thing, and she can come back here and live in my apartment. I think it's going to lead to a lot of that. I also heard the Supreme Court, you know more about this than I do. I heard that they need a case before they can deliberate or come up with something, that they don't make rules willy-nilly, but someone needs to put a case before them, and then they can do the work that they do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the grounds upon which they did, the majority of 5 declined to intervene, is basically saying that it wasn't ripe yet, that the controversy was not ripe yet, and that it needed to work its way up. The dissent, and there were multiple, makes the argument that it's clearly unconstitutional based on precedent. And by the way, that's why the Chief Justice, I believe, joined them, because he's not ready to just kind of ignore 50 years of precedent in the face of something that's obviously, based on current law, unconstitutional. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who can argue that the law itself isn't unconstitutional as on its face, because we always say that's one of the grounds for constitutionality, is that it's a facially unconstitutional. It clearly is. Does it have to work its way up in a way that is applied, basically somebody to get a judgment for $10,000 against a abortion provider, for instance, and then they appeal it, it goes up and it gets in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. The real question will be, once it works its way up, will one of the 5, are they going to switch their vote at that point and say, okay, we now no longer have a procedural defect, we're going to address this head on the merits? And so that's the question. And is it going to be Amy Coney Barrett, or is it going to be Kavanaugh? Because I don't think for a second that it will be Gorsuch, Clarence Thomas, or Alito. They're not going there. I think it is clear based on their record that they will vote to overturn Casey and potentially Roe. So the only shot when this gets up there on the merits for Roe to survive is going to be if Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett decide they're going to flip and it becomes 5-4 in the other direction.
What do you say to this? Because whenever this stuff goes down, the doom and gloom comes out, and I've had people say to me, if you're a rapist, you'll do less time than the woman who had the abortion. And I don't have to read any of the actual laws. I always just go, it's never going to happen. That's not going to happen. And they go, that's what the law says. That's what the law says. And I always go, it may be what the law says, but it's not going to happen that in the state of Texas, women who get abortions do more prison time than rapists, or possibly the person that raped them that caused them to get the abortion.
Well,
but you tell me. I really
let
don't
me tell you. So it was interesting because I was thinking last night, the night before, when my father was a DA in the LA County DA's office, and that was in the 50s and the 60s. He used to prosecute doctors for murder, for abortion in LA County.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that was a thing, and that was in California, and so we're talking, whatever it was, how many years ago, 6 decades ago, and they usually what would happen is they would give the woman some kind of immunity or a lesser sentence to roll over on the doctor and cooperate with the DA in prosecuting. So could I see that happening again? I suppose some of the crazy things that I see, absolutely. I could see doctors getting prosecuted. I could see women getting prosecuted. So the criminal justice system kind of is on an endless cycle, and we're kind of entering the new cycle that's not all that new. It's just 5 or 6 decades removed.
All right. We have the next story, which is Gary was
Elijah McClain out of
Yes.
Aurora, Colorado. That's
right.
the story that, yeah.
Right. We remember that story. Young black man, I think 23, walking home at night, hoodie on maybe. Somebody called the cops. Cops showed up, resisted arrest, allegedly wrestled to the ground, called the paramedics, shot him with something, which
ketamine,
which
I don't understand. Why would he be shot with ketamine?
I don't know. I didn't even know that was a thing. And they thought he was in that hysterical delusion thing that's brought on when people have too many drugs in their system, and it's happened before where cops rolled up on someone, they were out, beaked out of their mind on something.
Let me clarify the term.
Yes.
Excited delirium.
Excited delirium, which is something the cops use, which I guess exists on occasion, but I think they've over-applied it. In this case, they applied it to a guy who was not in excited delirium, which is brought on by drugs, I believe. You might have been able to make that argument for George Floyd, but I don't know that you could make that argument for this fella. Anyway, shot with ketamine, which I didn't know was a thing either. And then his heart stopped somewhere.
Did I not know it was a thing? But I know people who get ketamine treatments, and it's usually for depression and things of that nature. And it costs a lot of money. It's not cheap. And I can't believe that paramedics are out there just injecting people with ketamine.
Yeah. So died at the hospital or on the way to the hospital. The thing kind of went away for a little while, and now it's back in a big way. And there's all kinds of charges going on.
Yeah, Gary, review, not only did the cops get charged, but they charged the first responders as well, correct? The EMS.
Correct. So there were 32 counts, including manslaughter, filed against 5 men. 3 are police officers, and 2 were the paramedics that arrived as well.
Mm-hmm. And I guess they're being charged for administering the ketamine, and also then there's the cover-up, I suppose, as well, because I think that's a big part of this. It's interesting. Colorado is, pretty progressive by most standards. It seems weird that the ketamine thing was part of their protocol. It doesn't feel like a Colorado thing. You know what I mean?
I always thought the ketamine was a Colorado thing, but you had to go and pay a large amount of money for it.
Right, right.
Right? Yeah,
yes.
That's maybe they're so progressive that they just dispense ketamine on the street. The whole thing, I was telling Gary yesterday, I do not understand this story at all. It makes little or no sense to me. I don't understand what they were doing to this kid in the first place. I don't understand what the EMS were thinking. I just would love to know more of the facts of this case, because it's mind-boggling to me the way that it's been reported.
Well, probably. Here's what I'm guessing. What I'm guessing is the guy was doing nothing, and he was walking down the street. But the problem is the nosy neighbor calls the fuzz, right? And then the fuzz shows up and wants to know what's going on. And then the person that's doing nothing
By
says,
the way, do you think that somebody born in the 90s knows what fuzz is?
no,
Fuzz?
you would
Okay.
be reprimanded by one of your 20-something
Yes,
year olds who works at your office.
I'd be scolded. Yes.
So the fuzz shows up, and then the fuzz says, what are you doing? We got a call. And then the person that's walking, who's tired of the police, walking while black, says, I'm doing nothing. And then the cops say, fine, if you're doing nothing, show me your ID or do this or do that. Let me pat you down or whatever that thing is. And then the person that's doing nothing becomes indignant because they're doing nothing. And they're saying, why can't I'm just walking home from the liquor store? What kind of country are we living in? And then the cop escalates, and then the person pushes back. And then the next thing you know, there's 3 guys wrestling in the street. That's how the cops, the cops can go from show me your ID to wrestling in the streets in 4.7 seconds. It doesn't take long for you to tell, you can tell them no once. The second time you tell them no, you may be wrestling. That's kind
exactly
of it.
Right.
Now,
that's exactly right.
Everyone hates me for this advice, but my advice is you got to show them the ID. You have to cooperate, only because you could end up like this, which we talk about so frequently.
Well, I always say, too, look, when you're out there, they've got the badge and the gun. If you want to contest it, that's not the place to do it.
Get a badge number, get a name, get a whatever. I'm with you. Live to fight another day.
Right.
Sure.
Well, we'll get into a courtroom somewhere and deal with it then. We'll get the person under oath. We'll deal with it there. But the place to take a stand is not going to be in the street.
Right. And so I think the way the cops' brains work is they're called because somebody thinks you're a criminal. You're not a criminal. You were doing nothing. But at a certain point, you become a criminal because you're now wrestling with the cops. And now you're treated as if it was a righteous bust. You know what I mean? Now it's like, I knew this guy was bad. We're wrestling with him. Well, he wasn't bad, but you have it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. At a certain point.
And then the police report is going to read, I wish I had a nickel for every time there's a disturbing the peace or a 148 in California where the police report reads, the arrestee became violent and then threw himself face first into the pavement.
Right.
Right. And then the client reads the report and says, that's not what happened. They tackled me. And I said, well, there you go. That's, yeah.
So I don't know why he died, though. Healthy 23-year-old guy. I mean, the ketamine, I don't know.
I'm sure it must be the ketamine because if you inject the ketamine and somebody has that kind of adrenaline going through their system as well. I'd ask Drew, but my guess is that probably could stop your heart in a heartbeat, literally.
Pardon the pun. Yeah. So I'm guessing the ketamine, although it does seem insane that you're an EMT and you're or EMS. EMT is electromagnetic tubing, which is used as a conduit. I think it's a construction thing. It's steel tubing, in other words.
It can also be an emergency medical technician.
Oh, that's right. So I was right with my EMT. All right. The point is this. It seems weird that you would show up and have a syringe full of something that could kill somebody if they were agitated and their adrenaline was pumping. It seems very weird to me that you would have this on your rig and as part of your kit. You know what I mean? If it was possible that you could inject a healthy person, a healthy 23-year-old, and they could flatline on the way to the hospital because of this injection. I just feel like it would not be part of any of their protocol. So there was probably either a pre-existing condition that he had or something in him that, fought with the ketamine or didn't react well with the ketamine, or it was possibly the chokehold that caused a lot of the damage.
And that's why I would love to see the autopsy or coroner's report and see what the coroner concluded, because
they did not conclude anything. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. The county coroner stated that it may have been an accident resulting from an idiosyncratic drug reaction, or it could have been homicide if the officer's use of the carotid hold contributed to his death, or it could have been natural if he had an undiagnosed mental illness that led to excited delirium, and the intense physical exertion combined with a narrow coronary led to an arrhythmia. If he had an asthma attack, or if he aspirated vomit while restrained.
I did want to ask this because I always think of you when I see the person, the father of the deceased or the mother of the deceased, when I see them doing their hit on CNN with their lawyer that's sitting next to them, explaining that, he was a good boy and he never was involved with gangs or whatever that ubiquitous CNN hit is now. I was noticing the dad was wearing 2 gold hoop earrings and like a Lakers ball cap. Now, I always think of you because my thing is my heart goes out. That's not what I'm talking about. Nobody should lose a son. No parent should bury a child. We know all that. I'm simply saying, if we're doing our hit, maybe that morning, don't put the 2 hoop earrings in, and you got a beautiful head of hair. Let me take the ball cap off and fluff it up a little for you. And here's a pastel cardigan sweater to put on, because it's better. The optics are better. They're just better.
I have a recent case. I may have told you this story.
You can find a picture of this guy with his lawyer, by the way, Gary. I just surprised Gary with that. But go ahead. Yes.
And the client is a very prominent NFL player, and we were going through the investigative stage, and in that right before the hearing, had on the reverse cap, and we're about to do we're about to do a Zoom,
right.
And I said, you got to take the cap off. Right. We're not going to do this with the cap on like that. And
hey, old man, you're not the boss of me. I never heard of the fuzz.
Just say it's an interesting, once again, I'm the old white guy. What can I tell you?
Look, far be it for me to tell you your business, but here's how I would couch this. I would say, would you show up at court with a baseball cap turned backwards, or would you put a suit and tie on? And he'd go, well, we'd show up at the court, you put a suit and tie on. Okay. This is the court of public opinion. So it still has the word court in it.
I like that. So you could say, would you go to church that way?
Right. You don't have to put a 3-piece suit on. I'm just saying, let's just take off the NWA cap and set it down out of reach of the Zoom, out of purview of the Zoom camera. All right. Well, Gary can find that. We'll also, so I don't know where this thing is going, but I think it's not looking good for the cops or the EMS workers.
Right. I'm telling you, I've got to see police reports. I've got to see other things. There's a huge disconnect here that needs to be plumbed.
Well, I'll hop onto a subject I was thinking about, which is one of my favorites during this whole COVID business has been a reporter named Alex Berenson, who is a New York liberal, well, at least his base is, Manhattan liberal Jewish, I believe, reporter. So he had all the sort of bona fides of someone on the left. He wrote a book probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, or published papers on what marijuana use was doing to young people, and that he was pretty negative about it, based on his wife, who I think was a clinical psychiatrist or something, who, I don't know if she was clinical or not, she worked in that field, and she was seeing a lot of problems with young people that were habitual pot smokers, basically before the age of 21. So he published a book or some papers on that.
It was a book called Tell Your Children, The Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence.
Right. And immediately then ran afoul of the left. Because
what year was the book written?
It's probably
2019.
Oh, it was only 3 years ago or 2 years ago.
January, right at the beginning.
Oh, right at the beginning. That's why it feels a little longer. Anyway, he ran afoul of the left because he took a stance against kids smoking weed. And, that's their wonder drug or somehow there's, and my thing with pot, it's always been a simple equation. I got a 15-year-old son. Would you hope that Sonny smokes marijuana? My answer, no. Okay. Well, now I've rendered a decision on pot because I said no. Now, does that mean I would institutionalize him or send him into foster care? No. It would be my wish as a father that my teenage son did not smoke weed on a regular basis or at all. But I feel the same way about chili dogs and booze. Fine. Okay.
Do you feel as passionately about chili dogs and booze?
No, I here's the way I feel about pot. Oh, well, booze to some degree. Here's the thing about pot. Pot is a lot more powerful now than it was back when we were coming up. And I mean, it is, by magnitudes stronger than pot was when we were growing up. So it's more, it's the difference between, drinking a spiked seltzer at 5% alcohol and drinking Don Julio. I mean, it's just
right.
There's more kick to it. Fine. And it's also shown that obviously it can affect development of parts of your brain and stuff like that. So no, it's not good for them. But, again, I wouldn't lock him in the room and weld the door shut if I found out about it, but it's just something I did. So, all right. The point is, it's not a multiple vitamin. It's not a multivitamin. It's pot. Okay. So Alex Berenson basically said, hey, I don't think this is good. And he felt the ire of the left because this was basically your New York liberal Jew, here are your talking points. Here's how this has to work. Here's what pot is. Here's your feelings on the insurrection. Here's your feelings on Trump. Here's your feelings on taxes. Here's your feelings on the border. Here's your feelings on everything. And stay in line. Well, he didn't stay in line because he's intellectually honest. And then COVID came around. And now he started scratching around with COVID. And he started writing papers on COVID. And he was immediately pulled off of Twitter and banned and ridiculed and everything else. He happened to be right about everything. But of course, that ain't going to work. So with CNN, so now the liberal New Yorker is no longer, he can no longer go on CNN because he has thoughts about how effective masks are or ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. And that flies in the face of their narrative. But I don't even know what their narrative is other than nothing works other than what we tell you to do. But he begged to differ. So now
it's interesting that you say that because maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Bill Maher did a bit for 7 or 8 minutes. You may have seen it.
Yes.
And I actually read articles and heard people opine that he had done more damage. The left the people on the left were talking than Tucker Carlson because he was almost it was blasphemy for him to talk about the wokeism as he was calling it, and that was it was almost a fervor as to how dare he talk this way? Did you see this?
Yeah, he'll get blasted for taking down wokeism and cancel culture. He gets blasted for talking about therapeutics and not being morbidly obese and taking control over your own health by not being fat. And And again, it's just one of our own has strayed away from the flock. You know, Bill Maher got over the fence and he's straying, and he must be reined back in and brought into this herd of sheep who does a group thing. So Berenson, he's intellectually honest. He's a reporter, and he went looking for news and data and information on COVID that would probably buck what you would see coming out of Fauci or the White House or CNN. Now, of course, he was right about everything, but he couldn't be tolerated by CNN. Now, the comedy that you and I always talk about is then he becomes a fixture on Tucker Carlson because he wants to get his information out, and he's banned from MSNBC and CNN and all the other networks. And in his old boss, the New York Times, he's no longer welcome there. Not because he's wrong, but because he has opinions that aren't in lockstep with theirs, even though they're a newspaper and he's a reporter, but fine. Now he's banned. Now he goes to Tucker Carlson. Now he becomes a mouthpiece for the radical right seen on Tucker Carlson. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy again. He doesn't want to do it there. He'd like to go on Anderson Cooper's show and talk about it, or Don Lemon's show, but they won't let him on his show, and he has to speak about what he knows, and he wants to find an audience. So that's what happens. Then he gets pulled off of Twitter. Then everything he said, you know, every time he says something that gets him booted off Twitter, a week goes by, and then the data comes in, and it turns out everything he was saying was accurate. Now he's going after these platforms. He's saying, you destroyed my reputation. And
I would love to have him on and talk to him. I mean, if you
we shall. Yes, we shall. And so here's my question to you. You can kind of assign a monetary number to someone who was hurt in an industrial accident, physically now confined to a wheelchair, has to get a special van, and the house has to be outfitted to accommodate, blah, blah, blah. But what about reputation? Like, how do we assign a number to that? And isn't it more nuanced? And also we're wading into uncharted waters here, right? Like, you know, big tech banning, saying, you know, the stuff he said was dangerous and inaccurate and misinformation. So you have a guy who makes his living doing very detailed research, and then when he presents the detailed research, it's stamped with misinformation.
And it's a very, look, the whole idea of social media, the internet, and things of that nature I always thought, the marketplace of ideas. You want to challenge. You want to have an exchange. I like to read things that are outside of what I believe that challenge. I mean, that was the whole idea. You know, Drew and I have talked about that. The whole idea when we were coming up of a liberal arts education was to develop critical thinking. Critical thinking is not to be in lockstep. Critical thinking is to read other viewpoints, to engage in other viewpoints, to have a spirited discussion. I mean, the idea of a courtroom is where you've got two sides in an adversarial system, which are kind of at each other, testing each other and testing the what you're saying. That's what cross-examination is. So I don't understand this idea. It's almost as if we would want to have a trial and we only want to hear the direct testimony. We don't ever want to cross-examine. We don't ever want to search for the truth. That's what the definition of cross-examination is. The world's most powerful search engine for the truth is cross-examination, if it's well done. But it's almost as if we don't want that anymore. It's almost as if we want nothing but direct examinations.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So what do you think the chances are? It's a little a la Nick Sandmann in terms of going after CNN and many of these other news outlets. There's a little precedent for it now with Nick. It's not apples to apples, but what do you think?
It isn't. I think it's a tough, given the current law, it's very tough, very difficult. And absent, you know, I always think back because we often get people who inquire about us taking these cases on contingency, things like that. The guy who really kind of pioneered so-called revenge litigation, as they call it, was Peter Thiel and the Gawker lawsuit and with Hulk. And you really have to have a deep pocket to try to survive all of the legal hurdles that you have to go through. And it has to be, part of the reason, even though she and I may disagree philosophically on a lot of things, Harmeet. Harmeet's out there kind of swimming upstream on a lot of the things. She does it through her nonprofit, and it's a Herculean task. It's not an easy task that she jumps into. It's one of the reasons I kind of admire the work she does. I always thought when I was coming up that, defending reviled people was kind of a noble task. People said, oh, you're a scum because your clients are scum. No, I mean, it's when you've got the full force and credit of the government coming after your client and targeting your client, that's when you want somebody who's going to stand up and try to defend them. And kind of what she's up against is kind of that same huge force, monolithic force coming at her.
So in a nutshell, Twitter and Facebook and all these entities have 15 floors of lawyers and endless deep pockets. A lawyer's probably not going to pick up a case like this on contingency because there's just so many hours involved and there may be no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So a guy like him has to fund this litigation himself, and it's an endless litigation with someone who never runs out of money or attorneys.
It's exactly right. And that's one of the, somebody once said, and it's famously been quoted, litigation is a rich man's sport. So maybe you say now rich person's sport, but litigation is not for the faint of heart. And it's even something as simple as civil rights litigation. Civil rights litigation can be the most frustrating thing that I've ever done, just because you're constantly running up against immunities. You're constantly running up against a judiciary that is populated by ex-prosecutors. You're constantly running up against that kind of a situation. I was thinking also about the idea that contingency lawyers generally, that's also not for the faint of heart, because you take a swing and a miss and you're eating it. That's it.
As the law firm is eating it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go out on that semi-depressing note. I don't know if you ever found a picture of the dad, Gary.
You're very specific, so I wasn't able to find one that lined up exactly, so I made you a little sampler of some of his various appearances on TV.
That's the upper right, double earring.
No Lakers, that's all I'm saying.
No, I'm saying, come on, that's hyperbole.
Okay.
Baseball cap and double hoop earrings is what I'm saying. I'm just saying.
She's wearing, but what's she wearing? She's
got a suit there in the top right, and she's wearing a jacket on the bottom.
I am saying I keep either a burnt, or if I'm an attorney, I keep either a burnt orange cardigan sweater in the trunk of my Volvo or a powder blue cardigan sweater in the trunk of my Volvo. And when we do such hits on CNN, out comes the sweater. That's all.
That's you, belt and suspenders.
That's me. I'm going to Google that shit. All right. You can find me this Friday, September 10th, Royal Oak, Michigan, Royal Oak Music Theater. And then the next day, Saturday, I'll be in Kansas City at the Arvest Bank Theater. So come on out. Probably a few tickets left for that. I'm in Chicago. I'm in St. Louis. I'm in the hell, Maryland, I guess. It's MD, Maryland.
Yeah, that's outside
Maryland.
Baltimore.
There I am. I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm in Philly. I'm in Naples. Just go to adamcarolla.com. I'm everywhere. What do you got, Mark?
If you're in the Hamptons, come by the Capri Hotel. It's quite a weekend. If you're in Palm Springs, stop by the V, or San Clemente, go by the Casa Tropicana, downtown LA, Engine Company 28, or at the airport, and 10E Mediterranean Tapas.
And you can check out all our free information on our Pluto TV channel 687. Got a lot of racing stuff there as well. Until next time, it's Adam Carolla for Mark Garagos saying mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.